Welcome to the herd and thanks for listening. If you enjoy this sodcast, please like it, share it, give it a good rating, and follow, and help more people find their way into the Ruminati herd. If you have suggestions for improvements, please let me know. Howdy, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Meet Your Herdmates sodcast. I'm very pleased today to be joined by Kristine Tapley, all the way from Langruth. Did I?
Yeah, pretty good.
Okay, it'll do then. Good. And thank you for joining us, Kristine.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So you're a owner-operator of a cow-calf operation. I just watched, well, I haven't finished. I just found it and started watching a presentation you gave to an Ontario group back in January.
Okay, the Beef Farmers of Ontario, probably.
Yes, and a fascinating story of you developing that operation. But I was first introduced to you as an agrologist who works for Ducks Unlimited Canada. And that was after I had seen you in the Guardians of the Grassland video and contacted some people, and then the connection got made. So that's why you're having to put up with me today. So now you know who to thank. So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, how you got into the cattle business, how you became an agrologist, or maybe just start on that and I'll ask you some questions along the way.
Sure, yeah. So I actually grew up in cattle. My parents had a cow-calf operation, and so not very far from me, just half an hour from where I am now. And for a number of reasons, it seemed as though growth in that ranch was not going to happen because flooding issues and kind of land pressures and all kinds of issues. And so I actually never thought that I would be a primary producer. I didn't think that I would raise cattle myself. I went and took a degree in agriculture and majored in agroecology. So kind of like the kind of a systems approach to solutions between agriculture and the environment. Then I worked for a little while and ended up going back and got a master's in animal science, looking at greenhouse gases from background in cattle. And so through that kind of time at school, I ended up getting a mentorship with the Canadian Cattlemen's Association. They have a young leaders program, and I had asked to do a mentorship in sustainability, something on a scale larger than my own ranch or my research. And I was fortunate to be paired with Jeff Fitzpatrick-Stillwell, who was at the time a senior manager of sustainability for McDonald's Canada. And it was right at the time that McDonald's Canada had announced that they would be sourcing verified sustainable beef, but they didn't know what that meant. And so what an amazing mentor to have and be a fly on the wall in those early conversations about what is beef sustainability, kind of those beginning meetings. It was all happening at the same time, the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. And so after I graduated with my master's, Ducks Unlimited Canada was looking for an agrologist to kind of be a liaison between themselves and the beef industry. And that person would be their membership representative at the roundtable. And so I snaffled that up and did my best to get that position, because it really was, all of my world summed up into one job posting. So I was so excited, and them, Ducks Unlimited, really recognizing the importance of the beef industry. At the time, I was just building my own cow-calf operation. As I said, they wanted the position to be in Regina. I said, I can't feed cows from Regina. You're going to have to let me have a home office. And they absolutely embraced that, really understood that the fact that I was in the industry, actually participating added a lot of value to my job. So that's kind of a whirlwind tour to how I got here.
Perfect. Just to clean up a few crumbs along that trail, you said backgrounding. Define that for people who might not be familiar.
No, so please catch me up on every time I do that, because I try and edit it. I'm terrible at it. But the idea, so in a cow-calf operation, you will raise a calf to a range of weights. So first, I'll tell you my personal. So we would wean a calf, so take it off its mother, start feeding it something other than milk and whatever forage it can gather itself. So separate from the mother, and then that calf goes on high protein, so largely forage-based diet. And this is because you don't want to feed high energy, fat building diet when they're that small. You need to grow that frame and muscle before you add that high energy diet that would put on the fat later. So especially in Manitoba, we have a large backgrounding community. So have those spring calves weaned in October, November. Then they eat hay and maybe a little bit of grain if it's really cold, kind of thing. And then they'll grow slowly over that winter. Typically, after a backgrounding ration, they go back on grass for the next summer season, next grazing season. And then from there, they might, if they're in a traditional system, they would go into a feedlot and get a higher energy proportion in the fat.
Well, and we've skipped right over where Langruth, Manitoba is. So just in case people aren't really big on their geography of Canada or specifically Manitoba, whereabouts is that located?
Yeah, so in Manitoba, I'm only probably 3 hours off of the U.S. border, so 3 hours north of the border, and then I'm only 3 miles off of Lake Manitoba to the west. So it's still southern Manitoba. There's a long ways north of us, but in terms of major population centers, I'm already getting up north.
Indeed. So it seems like it's kind of northwestish of Winnipeg.
Yeah, I'm about an hour and a half northwest of Winnipeg.
Okay. And they wanted you in Regina?
Yeah, more central to DU priority area, I guess.
Okay. Well, so why does Ducks Unlimited care about cattle, and what's that about?
I get asked that question all the time. If you think about Ducks Unlimited Canada, or Ducks Unlimited in general, is interested in conserving, protecting, restoring wetlands and grasslands across the country for habitat. And if we think about who owns the existing habitat, because we've lost a lot, who owns the stuff that's left? And it's largely beef producers. If you think about where the grass and water is, that's where the ducks live, but that's where the cows live too. And so recognizing that this is a really important audience, and if we continue to lose beef producers off the landscape, then that land that was used for raising beef will be converted to some other use, probably crops. And those more marginal lands will get cultivated, and we'll lose all the benefits that were in that grass when the cows were grazing.
And that's one of the points that I try to emphasize, is that there's only so much land that we can use to produce food. And of that land, most of it is not suitable for producing foodstuffs that we can eat directly. And that animal source food is essential, I believe, for proper human development and function. And ruminant animal agriculture has some really unique ecological advantages. And one would be its role in maintaining grassland health.
Yeah, absolutely. So not only is the beef industry important for kind of being a placeholder, as in if they're gone, the grassland likely will go with them, but actually just the interaction of grazing. And if you think of how those grasslands, how that ecosystem evolved over time, it was evolved under a large ruminant grazer, bison, right? And so over many, many, many years, this interaction of grazing and rest and grazing and rest, that's how this ecosystem developed. And so if we are to just remove the cattle, but then leave that land stagnant, which by the way would never happen because have you seen land prices? Something's going to happen with that land. But if we were just to leave it stagnant and not touch it, not graze it, not have that interaction, and all that nutrient and material grows up into the plant and then stays there. There's nothing to cycle it back down and to feed the soil ecosystem and to take those nutrients and bring them back down into that soil, or to use their hooves to trample the seeds back down to plant those new plants, or to have the little plants that just grow at the surface take some of the material away so that sunlight can come down to those plants. And it's a huge community that live in that grass, and it's important to have that grazing interaction for both the grass and the soil. If you take it away, it's not going to be sustainable.
I believe it was from Guardians that I heard the quote about cattle share the ecosystem, whereas when we go into commodity cropping, or actually any kind of cultivation, that we're dramatically changing that ecosystem.
Yeah, right. And to have to turn that grass upside down and expose those roots and expose that soil. So for one, if we want to talk about carbon, everybody's interested in talking about carbon. Well, that soil, especially if it's a native ecosystem that has never been broke up, holds a lot of carbon. And when you cultivate it for the first time, some people say it's 30% lost, some people say 50% lost of the carbon that's in that soil is now put up into the atmosphere. And yeah, when you plant it back down and you grow crops well, maybe if you replant a perennial plant that is able to sequester carbon, you can start building that carbon back, but it'll take, I've heard 100 years to get that carbon back down. So I think that there are some great things that we can do with carbon sequestration and different grazing techniques and things like that. But first and foremost, we need to keep the grass that we have, because man, it's going to be pretty hard to catch up if we continue to lose. Actually, I wrote down a stat I read. Between 2014 and 2018, loss of grasslands across the Great Plains has occurred at an average rate of 4 football fields every minute. It's like, I can't even comprehend the scale of land.
Yeah. So is that Canadian football or U.S. football?
No comment.
But yes, indeed, the loss of this ecosystem, and I've recently put up some posts about, virtually 80%, I think that was the number, of the prairie in North America has been converted already. And 90-some%, virtually all of the tall grass prairie is gone, and 2/3 of the mixed and short grass prairies. So it's important for us to be concerned about ecosystem degradation. We seem to be focused on certain ecosystems and ignore other ones. And, maybe it's my bias, but I think that grasslands ought to receive more attention. And in fact, I just saw a presentation yesterday where people who are proposing reforestation, globally. as a means to mitigate against climate change. But they were looking at grasslands and savannas and saying, well, no, 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 those need to be in trees. It's like, well, maybe there's a reason they weren't in trees to begin with. And maybe grass has a value beyond your perception of it. So, in addition to food production, there's wildlife. There's water quality issues. I heard somebody describing grasslands as the kidneys of the planet, to filter the water. But certainly, when we're not plowing, when we're maintaining vegetative cover, we don't have the water erosion, we don't have the wind erosion, so the water quality is improved. I mentioned wildlife, but that's critical. And if we're not grazing, some of these ground nesting birds aren't favored when we have the tremendous overburden from a forage agronomist perspective. Fire mitigation, that was another one I heard just yesterday, that in California we have a history of suppressing wildfires, and not utilizing grazing as a tool to remove fuel, except that some First Nations people have been able to utilize fire in the lands that they are managing. And so the ranching community kind of like, what are you doing? And they said what they were doing, and they're like, we've been trying to do this for decades. How can we help you? So people coming together to utilize a tool that isn't favored in one part of the bureaucracy but is in another, but it's a tool. It's not the kind of a problem that it has been in Australia, California, Southern Europe. I mean, we see this pattern being repeated. The I the issue of wildlife, and also just aesthetics, I guess is the word. Somehow I'd rather look at grassland than canola. Nothing against the national crop, but it just there's so much there. We say grassland, and many people just look and, oh, that's grass. And I was just walking with a friend today and said, first of all, look at the flowers on the grass. And they were looking for those little date. No, no, no. The grass has flowers, and look at how many different kinds of grass there are just here in this square meter off the walking path. So when we say grasslands, there's this tremendous wealth of different plants.
Yeah, absolutely. And that again varies as you go across the province or the country or North America, right? I think it is a very rich, interesting ecosystem. And to your point about wildlife and that loss, since the 70s, we've lost 87% of prairie obligates. So, for example, grassland birds that you had mentioned that require prairie, we've lost an amazing number of that population. There's lots of threatened species that just don't have, that need those big, wide open grass spaces, and we just don't have them anymore. And I think, so you bring up canola, and I think it's, I want to point out that I'm not anti-grain. I mean, I like beef, first and foremost. But I think we have to recognize that there's only one landscape, there's only so many acres. We need to figure out how to grow crops as efficiently as possible, allow crop producers to use all the tools that they have in their toolbox. I think there's nothing frustrating more than telling them they have to do more, but they're not allowed to use all of the science that we have. And then also recognize how important it is to have this conservation for all of the rest of the things that live there too. And there's got to be a way that we can all kind of play in the sandbox together. But until the commodity price that comes off of the canola field equals the commodity price that comes off the grassland, we're going to continue to see that conversion. I mean, and I think sometimes people will think it's, a grain farmer or a beef producer, but that's not the case. And I don't know what the stat is in the US, but in Canada, 60% of our beef producers are mixed operators. So if he's not making any money on the beef side, he's going to try and grow canola, right? And I don't think that that's anybody's fault other than that's what we're paying him to do. And so I think that there's bigger problems than just our wants to keep it grass.
Well, yeah, it's true. I think, first of all, certainly on this side of the border, we seem to have devolved into an us and against them in everything. And then we also hear arguments against animal agriculture as if there is crop agriculture on one side and animal agriculture on the other, and they can somehow be separated. And this is just not possible. And at the same time, there's very interesting research that's looking at the integration of livestock back into our North American cropping systems and our European cropping systems. And in many ways, these are sorts of things that are still a reality in other parts of the world, although some very interesting research going there as well. So I see that very much the future. But on the land that you managed to manage at this time, goodness, you're ranching on an old gravel quarry. Tell us about how you do that.
I talked about land prices. It's tough to get land.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it was cheap.
No doubt.
Yeah, so as a new farmer, right? So I came from cattle, but don't farm with my parents. And my husband grew up in the city. He took an agronomy degree, and so his plan had been to grain farm on his grandparents' farm, and it didn't come together. Succession plan wasn't there, and so kind of introduced him to cattle. We rented some land and took a annual loan out, or a year loan to do that grass cattle. So to take some backgrounders and grass them, like we talked about at the beginning. And then I got greedy and ended up breeding them. Was going to sell bred heifers or bred cows, and didn't work. There was a drought and we had feed, so we ended up keeping them and calving out 75 heifers our first year. It was a big learning curve for both of us. I mean, Graham had never even been in cattle, so but he's still here.
Good on him.
Yeah, and so realizing that this is something that we wanted to do, started trying to put together a land base. But I think that that's something people romanticize, this idea that if you are a rancher, you have this big block of land and you can just move your cattle around from, open a gate. I mean, it's just so easy. But no, man, like my parents had a century farm, so there is a pretty good block there, but trying to piece it together from the beginning, it's like a giant game of Risk. It takes a long time. And so we'd come upon this piece of, I think there was 3/4, but there was only maybe 60 or 70 acres of it was a spent gravel pit. And the stuff that wasn't a spent gravel pit was next door to the gravel pit. So you can imagine it really wasn't good land to begin with. And so we ended up accessing this program that helped us remediate or spread the topsoil that was left, which was very little, back over the exposed land. And then we did some bale grazing, so where we take ground bales of hay out, set them out on the land, and then bring the cattle to them rather than feed the cows in the pen. Let them eat that down, and then the stuff that they don't eat kind of blankets the soil, and they, the manure that they leave out there gives that nutrient, and so just to give it some kind of armor, and we were able to get some growth going. And as you get that biomass and then trample it down, and biomass and trample it down, and if you keep doing that and giving it rest to kind of heal itself, that's how you build that layer over the gravel and start to build soil. And so we've had some great luck. I think we bought that piece in 2013 maybe, and so we're taking out pears on the weekend out there, and grass looks great. So it's that was the first piece that we bought, and we've grown since then, and it's been really exciting to see that change. We have wildflowers growing there now, and you see all kinds of different wildlife every time we go up there. It's that's the really cool thing about, I think, being a cattle manager or a grass manager, is getting to see how your management truly does impact or make positive change on that landscape. Especially, when you're starting with a gravel pit, it's easy to see positive progress.
Yeah. Okay. It just sounds so picturesque. Okay.
Yeah, and actually, so that being what it is, but in the surrounding areas, and even some of that now that we've been able to kind of rehabilitate back to a state that you would have never known there was a gravel pit there. We've actually, I think we'll be putting an easement on it, and so it'll never be broke or cultivated or, drained into the future. So that's exciting for us. Kind of a rubber stamp that we made it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what sorts of, I'm going to jump back to Ducks Unlimited Canada, Ducks Unlimited US. What sorts of things are there programs from the conservation side that help producers deal with some of the challenges that they have from the cattle industry side?
Yeah, so that's the whole idea, I guess. Ducks Unlimited have been working with beef producers from their beginning, 80 some years. Excuse me. And so it's all about how to keep that habitat in place, and sometimes that means, or most times that means some kind of monetary incentive to the producer. So maybe it's to help out with forage seed costs. So to take annual crop land and convert it into perennial cover for 10 years. That's one of the programs we have up here. We do some purchasing of land, of annual crop land, sow it down to perennial cover, put an easement on, and then sell it back to the beef industry at a discount, so 30% less than what market value would be. So again, to try and give them a bit of a leg up and get our mission accomplished as well. And really trying to open up to different options for crop producers as well. So there's a program now called the Marginal Areas Program. And so sometimes in somebody's field, there are saline areas or areas that just don't produce very well. And yet every year you pull an implement over them and put that spray and seed and whatever else you do over there. And it's really not making any money. It's probably costing you money. And so with the amazing computers they have now attached to those tractors, they can kind of delineate those areas and figure out where they are. And then we'll pay you to take those areas out of production and plant them to some kind of like a pollinator mix, maybe. And so again, they would stay out of production for 10 years. So it's a win-win. But again, trying not to just tailor to the beef industry, but recognizing that it's a landscape effort and it's a working landscape. Right?
So you mentioned the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. You mentioned working in the sort of defining what sustainable beef means after a commitment has been made to source it, which so what does sustainable mean to you? What does it mean now in the community as an accepted sort of definition?
Yeah, so now, man, I should have that one canned, being a counselor on the roundtable. But yeah, I think that a lot of work went into kind of determining where we're at. So the CRSP they did a national beef sustainability assessment. So to really benchmark where we're at now, or where we're at back then, because we're actually this year coming up to the next sustainability benchmark. So we'll be able to kind of see how we've done over that first term, and see and really use that benchmark then to set industry goals for things like water and food waste and land use, and then there's also, of course, an economic side of things, and social aspect. I think that different kind of labor concerns and things like that. But as far as the animal welfare, I think it's always been kind of glowing reviews on that end. But they've tried, I think, to set some pretty remarkable goals this time around. So in Canada, our plan is to maintain the 35 million acres of grass that we have left, which I think is aspirational given the rate of loss that we know is occurring. But if you don't draw the line in the sand, then how are you going to make it stop? So I think that's really exciting. Another goal, I believe, is a 50% reduction in food waste. So that's one I think that when we talk about beef sustainability, people quickly forget about that part, that it's, not just when it leaves my operation that the sustainability story ends. It's where it goes from there, how we use it, how much we throw out in our little Ziploc containers from the fridge, and that kind of thing too. So, so that was the first step. We're benchmarking again to continue to set those continuous improvement goals. But another really cool thing that the CRSB has been able to do is to create a sustainability framework. And so it's a certification system. So we have a third-party auditor that will come on to my farm, your farm, and then there's a list of indicators, or kind of like a sustainability checklist for determining what sustainable practices are. And so if I go through the checklist with that auditor and get certified sustainable, then I can market my beef as such. But the thing is, it goes all the way through the whole beef value chain. And so if that animal makes it from one end of the production cycle to the other, going on only certified sustainable operations, then we call it certified sustainable beef. And then it's a sustainable beef sourcing mechanism. So McDonald's is one group that is selling beef with that rubber stamp on it, which is very, very cool. Oh gosh, I think it's 14 million pounds of beef we've been able to put through the program, 1,300 beef operations. So, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's still not big enough, but it's exciting that we're able to. Sorry, and then I forgot to mention it. If you get all the way through the system, then each person who touched that animal does get a bit of a monetary incentive for having produced that meat in that way.
So, are you aware of a similar thing in the U.S. with the U.S. Roundtable?
So I don't believe that they have the. I shouldn't. Don't quote me.
No, that's
I know
fine.
that they definitely, the roundtable is there, and they definitely do have those indicators and a system, but I don't know how the incentives do it. So,
Yeah, fair enough. Is the I don't know if you called it a checklist or sustainability criteria, is that a public document that people can see?
yeah, so if you go on the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, I think it's crsb.ca.
Hmm.
And there, underneath, there's a framework section of the website. There will be one for producers. So, those the cow-calf operators. And then there's also one for processors. So the Cargills of the world, the JBSs, they go through as well. So there's an environmental component, and then social questions. I think that I don't believe that there's any economic indicators. It's more like if we can build this and help
Hmm.
people produce more sustainably, that would be the economic benefit.
Yeah, I think that we need to acknowledge that if you can't make a profit, there's no sustainability. And regardless of where you are on the journey towards some goal, you have to be able to economically be sustainable.
Yeah.
But that word sustainability has many meanings, and I always like to say, well, what exactly do you mean by it? Because I think I know what I mean by it. I've been talking to people for some time about I want to include the health of the human consumer at the end of this
Mm,
chain. We talk about ecosystem services. There's been some effort in the US to put a monetary value on those those ecosystem services. And when they do, it ends up being a net positive for which the rancher is not currently compensated. And that's without the potential health impacts of consuming that product,
mhm.
which I'm going to argue could be massive in terms of its impact. And it's tricky, I understand. There's lots of ground in there that needs to be worked, and probably some more bales that need to be fed out on top of the rocks, or whatever the analogy is. But for too long, the beef industry has been blamed for health outcomes. And I think we have to get better at pushing back against that. Um, so let's see, we've talked about a number of topics. Um, and so you mentioned agrologist, and that's a word that I'm not all that familiar with and I still struggle with. So, what is an agrologist?
Yeah. So to me, I guess is an agrologist is the study of agriculture, or being the professional that delivers the science of agriculture. So if an agronomist studies how plants are grown and helps you deliver science on how to grow your crops, then an agrologist is more general than that, to be all agriculture. And so I would be an agrologist who focuses on beef, right? And so my background being in beef cattle and greenhouse gases from beef. So to get my status as an agrologist, I there's a Manitoba Institute of Agrology. So there's an ethics component to it, and understanding kind of how your professional opinion can really matter to people when it has to do with their businesses, and how we apply the science that we know to their farms. So it's in Ducks Unlimited Canada, it has very much an environmental component to it. I believe, if I think about the other agrologists that have been hired, there's a big component of how agriculture works on the landscape, and how we interact with the landscape. But I think more broadly, it's just delivering the science of it.
Hmm.
Eric, would you agree with me?
Yeah, yeah. So, Guardians of the Grasslands, that was a product of the Canadian Roundtable, is that correct? Or
No, so there was the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, Ducks Unlimited Canada, and Nature Conservancy Canada came together to make that film. Well, of course, Storybrokers Media, who are the people who so eloquently filmed that and got oh man, the visuals in that that they pulled together were really incredible, weren't they?
Hmm. It's one of those things where I was hearing about it, seeing little blurbs, and then the world went crazy, and so whatever else happened to the timeline, and so finally to see it fully released, I was very happy to see that and anxious to watch it, and then watched it and went, wow, this is very good, to tell this story to the population that really doesn't understand the value of grasslands, the role of ranching in grassland management. And it's not to say that everything's fine in ranching and we can't do things better. We all know that's not true in anything humans do. Why should ranchers be any different? Again, though, this point of, we need the products of the ranching enterprise. We need agricultural products. And yet, how do we do that in a way that at least maintains, if not arguably enhances, the environment in which it takes place? Those options aren't that numerous in today's world. And I've been learning more and more about what it looks like in the low and middle income countries. And one of my lines is that we have very high quality scientific evidence of the harm that comes to human beings who don't get enough animal source food in their diet. And we really don't have equal quality evidence that supports the idea of too much. And that's a story for later, and you don't have to buy into my shtick at all. But we do have billions of people in the world today that are malnourished, by the definition. I mean, we have 800 million that don't get enough calories, and then we've got 2.2 billion that are overweight or obese. That's a form of malnutrition. And we have all these chronic diseases that are now a bigger killer globally than the infectious diseases. And yet we have this growing body of evidence that says, if you eat this kind of food as opposed to that kind of food, we can actually reverse these chronic diseases. And talking to people in Africa about their cattle industries and what they need in order to advance them, in order to increase sustainably their operations. And I just see it as a tremendous area of hope, but we need more things like Guardians of the Grassland to reach an audience that has never thought about these things, because we haven't done a good job of reaching them yet.
Exactly. And I think that's, you've touched a lot of things right there. But for North Americans, what is in our backyard, as the most endangered ecosystem in the world, that's in our backyard. And I think it's easy to blame folks that are cutting down rainforests to grow soybeans or to raise beef cattle. But man, this is in our backyard. Do you think we should fix that before we start throwing stones?
I'm sorry, is that a plank in your eye? Would you like to?
It's frustrating, I think, and on a global scale, I think the global beef conversation is much different than the North American conversation, because everywhere in the globe didn't start with grasslands. The slate that was here before we got here was not prairie. That happens to be where we are, and that happens to mean that beef cattle are important to that, maintaining that system. But that's not the way it is everywhere, and I understand that, but don't discount the fact that that is what we have here. And man, I have been able to learn very little about some different, beef operations in other areas, and like you say, developing. I think that it's an amazing, important part of culture for everywhere in the world. I mean, if you're in it, and I'll leave the nutrition side to you. I do recognize that beef is a very nutrient dense, um, food, and I've been told by nutritionists if I want to take something to my grandmother, if she's in the hospital, take her some beef because if she's only going to take 2 bites, at least you got as much as you possibly could into her in those 2 bites, or my 3-year-old who's like eats like a bird. What are you going to give him? You're going to make him eat his meat. But
yes.
yeah, but I do think I've been able to have some conversations in different parts of the world. I got to visit in Mozambique in Africa and got to do some outcalls with the veterinarian. And so, somebody had sent an aid box to this group, and there were different things like, castration tools and things like that. And like, what are these? Like, they didn't send any instructions. Like, that's ridiculous. Not that they didn't know what it was, but that man.
Yeah.
That's, if I think about the vaccination protocols that we have here in Canada and the nutrition stuff that I go through every year to work out what rations I'm going to feed my animals, and get down to the decimal places, and yet there are lots of places that I think we could help, given the level of efficiency I think that we're producing beef in Canada.
Well, I saw a picture of you trying to sorry, I didn't mean to imply anything, inserting a probe into this round bale of hay. Why do you do that? He asked a leading question.
Well, I'm not sure which probe you were looking at, but there's lots of different reasons. So while you're haying, to make sure that it comes up in good quality, I test for moisture and make sure that its shelf life will be good, or that it won't mold or cause any kind of issues that way. But then once we have gathered up all the feed that we use, that's another, I think, interesting point that maybe we could get to later, is the idea that not everybody just feeds all the same thing all winter long or all year long. And in fact, byproducts from other industries or grain that didn't meet human use standards gets eaten by the rumen. That's the beauty of the rumen. You can put things in there. Those little bugs will go to work and it will produce a burger. It's an amazing machine. And so I do feed test everything that comes onto the farm, whether it's different kinds of grain or straw or hay or silage or, pea byproduct or carrots. We've had carrots before, all kinds of stuff, and get a nutritional analysis on them. And then I have Cow Bites, it's called, a program that helps me work out what mix of ingredients will get me the right nutrients for what stage of animal. So I feed different rations to my cows at different stages in their gestation, as they grow that calf, and different age of their life if they're a weaned calf, and to my bulls who I'm trying to develop and grow that frame. And so my husband laughs at me because I take, all of these feed tests and I have them all spread out, and then I have a spreadsheet of an inventory. So I have like 26 of these bales and 140 of these and 506 of these, and then try and work out how to feed them all out so that we don't have minus at the end of the year.
Yeah. So cow bites is BYTES. And then it's interesting because you make this a menu, some might say, or a ration or several rations, as you mentioned, different classes of your animals. And then you check the results. You weigh the animals to make sure you don't blame the cow. You adjust the diet. What a remarkable idea. So the that's again something I just try to point out to my friends who are coming from the human side of things is that there are these differences between human nutrition and animal nutrition. Um, so you there was something you wanted to come back to, I thought.
Oh, just the idea that
Oh, don't feed the same thing all the time. Yes,
well,
and everybody doesn't feed the same thing, so we're utilizing all these different resources. We're upcycling all these to make them far more valuable. So we're increasing the quantity and improving the quality of humanity's food supply. This is not competition. That's a critical point that frequently gets lost. You mentioned the off-grade grains. So one of the things I've noticed is that it's very hard from the data to separate out the grain that's fed to cattle from the grain that couldn't be fed to people. Right, and
yeah,
so there, and one would have to think that the grain that isn't fed isn't capable, isn't of grade, would be lower cost than the grain that is. And then you earlier were mentioning why you're not feeding these grains to background. Well, because that's expensive. And so we all know that the cattle industry is just operating at these incredibly high margins right now. You're just making so much profit. No, I'm kidding. So when 70
that's
to
why I
80,
have a second job with ducks.
yes. And does your husband still have a second job too? And why calving season is sort of a family affair at this point. So when 70 to 80% of your expense is feed costs, then whatever you can do to lower that is going to be the biggest impact that you can make on your profitability.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Especially when you live in somewhere as cold as Manitoba.
Yeah.
We budget for 200 days feeding every year. And that's, yeah, so, and we can lessen that because of stockpile grass and good grass management and stuff like that. But you don't always, even with that, it doesn't always work out for other reasons. We had a massive storm on Thanksgiving a couple of years ago and got, 3 feet of snow, and cows were all still out in pasture and had to come home.
Well, and for the folks south of the border, your Thanksgiving is a month earlier than
yes,
ours.
October.
At least a month. Yeah, it's the beginning of October, right?
Yeah.
So that's almost 2 months early to be getting that much. So how much? So cows can graze through snow for a while, but if it gets too deep, or worse, if there's ice on top of it.
Yeah. So the opinion of that is going to vary greatly, I would say, because I've seen cows, put their heads right under a snowbank to dig in for swat grazing or different things like that. We corn graze, so we grow corn specifically for grazing, and then take the cows out to the field using electric wire to partition off how much they will use in a couple of days and let them just eat it standing. And so sometimes there's piles and piles of snow out there when they go out there. But But like you say, that if you're stockpile grazing, so that snow is actually covering the grass, you just need to make sure that you have backup plans. Because like you say, if you get that ice cover and there's an issue, or if it, if you get too late in the season and it starts to melt or, rot or something, I think that the important thing to remember when extensive grazing those different is to have lots of backup options. You can't just bank on it always. But that said, there's lots of people in Canada, and even more in the States, of course, that graze all year round. It depends on your resource base. And that's the beauty of
location.
That's the beauty of the beef industry, and why creating a sustainability metrics is really, really hard, because everybody has an entirely different resource base. If you think about, one of the most stressful things for a cow is wind exposure, because keeping her heat, the wind can really cool her body down quickly, and so wind is an issue. And so maybe having wind protection built for somebody in Saskatchewan would be an important sustainability indicator for animal welfare. But if that same indicator is there for somebody in BC who lives in the middle of the, forest,
rainforest,
you probably don't need any windbreaks built.
Yeah. So where could, if people wanted to learn more about any of the, wait a minute, you mentioned swath grazing. Not let that one go by. What does that mean?
Sure. So another form of winter feeding would be to grow whatever the crop is. Maybe it's peas, oats. Maybe it's just some kind of forage, whatever it is. But then leave it in the field, just swath it into rows, and then again partition it off with electric fencing to only give so many swaths at a time. Again, it just prevents you from having to bale it up or package it up somehow, haul it all the way home, put it in a pen, have the manure in the pen, have to remove the manure. Why not just take them out to the field? So
I've seen a bit of that in Alberta, but I don't know the difference between their snowfalls there and you. I suspect they may get a little less. But
they have the beauty of the Chinook too, so it comes and then it melts. We don't have a Chinook.
No. So, but you probably got mosquitoes, right?
Oh yeah.
Do you have black gnats too?
No, not here.
Oh, good.
Big horseflies, though.
No.
Everyone has that. It's good though, because with the mosquitoes, we say they're the size of ducks, and that's really just to keep people away, so that we have a low population.
You say the size of ducks? What's the joke in Minnesota? They've got two sizes of mosquitoes. They've got the small ones that can fit through the screen, and then the big ones that just tear the screen off and come in.
That's about right.
So do you, if somebody wanted to learn more about anything that we've spoken about, do you have some resources? You mentioned the Canadian Roundtable. I'll be sure to put a link in. I'm going to put at least a link into a recent conversation that you gave to Ontario farmers. Ducks Unlimited Canada was another one that you mentioned. Any others that you think people who want?
Well, the link to Guardians, man, I would love everybody to watch that video. I think anybody who is on or near or cares about grassland, I think should be able to see that film. I think what's great about it is that it's not gloom and doom. It's really recognizing the power of this, of this relationship that conservation and cattle have, and it's a good news story that is not often one you hear about beef cattle. So, and
also, getting acquainted with a group of people who are promoting the International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists,
Yeah. Okay.
which is 2026 they're trying to get. So they, more support for that. I can add a link, and I probably should do more because they've got some really nice videos from all around the world, people who are pastoralists and sharing what that's like. Today's guest has been Kristine Tapley. Thank you, Kristine, for joining us, and look forward to maybe getting to visit your part of the world someday when I can cross the border legally.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. But yeah, of course, anytime that I get a chance to talk about grass and cows and what it means to me, the better.